Welcome back, everyone, to the monthly sync. If you haven't joined this webinar series before, we hold this every single month with the goal of providing a ton of value to CS leaders and CSMs. This time round, I'm joined by my awesome colleague, KJ, who leads our CSM team at Hook. And we're going to run this in maybe a different format than we've run the previous webinars. Usually, there's mostly back and forth Q&A, chit chat. Today is going to be a little bit more educational than other webinars, purely because of the content. So today is all about automations. The tech, the data that sits behind what we can automate has come an insanely long way in the last couple of years. And so if you're still one of these people, like this title suggests, manually sending renewals emails or driving customer adoption one by one, you're missing a really big trick and a huge opportunity to automate some stuff, take things off your plate, take things off your team's plates, and ultimately up-level your team. And that is what this webinar is all about today. As usual, we're keeping things short and sharp in 30 minutes. KJ and I do like to chit chat, and we absolutely love this topic. So we're going to try really, really hard and keep it on point. We're also going to try hard and leave some time for questions at the end. But if you do have questions as we go through, please type them in the Q&A or in the chat so that we can make sure that we get to them at the end. We'll get through as many questions as we possibly can. And if there's loads and we can't get through them all, what we typically do is send a follow-up FAQ after. And we have tons of really good content that we can send you after as well. All right, we're going to get into it. So what are KJ and I going to be talking through today? Well, we're going to be talking through why should you automate? So what's the benefit to you? What's the benefit to your team? We're going to talk through the types of automations that you could create. There is so much that you could go at. And so we're going to try and break this down into manageable chunks for you to think through. And then lastly, we're going to talk through how to map it out. And we're going to talk through how we went through this process to build out our automation strategy here at Hook. So I'm going to kick off with a little bit of the why, and I'm going to hand over to KJ to set some of the context on the types and the categories and how to think about this and how to think about agents. Hopefully the why is fairly obvious to this group on the call. But really here, what we're wanting to try and do is get the right information to you or to your CS team at the right time. We want to try and automate as much of the more manual CS processes as we possibly can. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean to totally automate the CSM role. What this means is automate some of the stuff that takes a ton of time and doesn't add a load of customer value so that you can free up your time or your team's time to spend time on the high impact, high value customer activities and get more face-to-face time with your customers. We're also leveraging automations to help you scale what would be one-on-one activity across hundreds or thousands of customers. This becomes particularly relevant in your scale CS or your pool CS or your digital CS model. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here is protect revenue. So if you think about the end goal is build smart, scale your processes so that you as a CSM or your CSM team can spend more time on high impact activities that we know are going to impact revenue. And this is the piece that we're going to try and bring to life for you guys today. All right, KJ, set the scene for us a little bit on what an automation is and how we should think about it.
Yeah, so automations I hear banded around quite a lot. It's a super general word that is used in lots of different contexts, right? And a lot of the time people think of it as just automated emails or just for your digital CS motion, but actually they're much broader than that. Put really simply, they're an automatic trigger and a following task. So you basically choose a set of criteria or a trigger, and if that criteria exists, then an action happens automatically. So for example, when a customer in your digital segment is 120 days from renewal with a green health score, that's your trigger. Then send an automated email to them, reminding them that their renewal is coming up. That's a task. What we talk about, if we move on to kind of the types of tasks that you want to trigger, what most people are talking about when they're referring to automations is the tasks. The triggers are They're necessary. We need to have the metrics and the points in time that you want things to be triggered. But what's more interesting is, what are those actions? So mostly when we think about automations, we think of things like multi-step emails or in-app nudges that run based on these triggers. But there are a bunch of other tasks you can trigger too. So the first category is alerts. This is telling your CSM or your account manager or your manager when something happens in the data. For example, there's been a huge drop-off in active users in the last few weeks. You've then got actions. So this is when an action is automatically taken off the back of a trigger, like sending an email to a new senior stakeholder on an account, or putting up a banner in app when a user hasn't used a certain feature for a little while. The final thing is agents. And you can use automations to trigger an agent. And this is really helpful for those scenarios where you want to trigger an intelligent action that takes context into consideration and generates next best steps for you. For example, an adoption agent that's working on your behalf if utilization has dropped. Now, what we're going to focus on for today's session is this actions section, because that's where most of the opportunity is, and is mostly what people are referring to when they say, let's automate this, let's make this automated. In a world of kind of agentic solutions, some people have asked me, why are you doing a webinar on automations? And well, the phrase comes to mind, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then you may treat everything as if it were a nail. There is still a ton of value in automations, and in many cases, it may actually be the better tool to fix the problem. So whilst I'm very frequently talking about agents, I'm also very frequently talking about automations and the value that they can provide as well. So one question that we get asked a lot is, well, how do I know when to deploy an automation versus an agent? So to start with, an automation is a linear, predefined flow. It can have branches and different rules, but you're basically building templated tasks on very rigid sets of criteria. An agent has much more flexibility and can design the path or the flow per customer in real time. And a good agent will use context from multiple different data sources to adapt its approach. A good rule of thumb is to use a rules-based automation when there's a very predictable and very repeatable motion. You don't need to consider too much nuance, and all of the outreach or the action can be templated. Agents are much more useful to deploy when there is like a fuzzy success criteria, like there might be a combination of factors that could imply this has been successful. They're also really useful when context is critical to the next step, and personalized content rather, with this context really helps push the needle forward. Okay, so now you know the theory. The fun part is in designing these automations and figuring out where to start. So there are two categories of automations. The first is signals and behaviors. These are things that happen in the data. Think license overages, usage dips, champion departures, behavior changes, even external factors like M&A activity. The second is kind of life cycle and customer journey related. So think about the things that you always want to happen and always need to happen. So new customer journeys, renewal flows, how to regularly deposit value into a customer's life cycle. The most mature CS orgs combine these two things together when they're thinking about their automation strategy.
Nice. Thanks, KJ. Okay, so we know what an automation is. We know that there are different types of tasks that you can automate, but today we're kind of focused mostly on the actions piece. And you know already that we typically categorize those actions into, okay, customer life cycle. What should we send to a customer? What should the customer experience when in their journey? and then signals and behaviors. So if they're healthy, what should they experience? If they're at risk, what should we send or what should they experience? So how do you piece all of this together to try and build out an automation strategy? Well, we actually thought the best way of talking through this would be to show you how we did this ourselves at Hook. And so we took two core approaches to build out our own automation strategy, and I'm going to talk you through that bit by bit. So the first thing that we did is we thought about, okay, if we map out our whole customer journey and we oversimplify into three core phases, so onboarding, adoption and value, and then the point where you want to renew or expand a customer, what are all of the jobs to be done in that part of the life cycle? What do we want the customer experience to be? What do we think they need to get from us to be really successful in each of the three phases? And how does that translate then into jobs to be done or tasks to be done by a CS team? Once we'd figured that piece out, we then asked ourselves a number of questions. So if we look at all of the things that we know a customer needs to receive in order to be successful, well, out of those things, what can we automate? So if we know that an automation is a predefined linear flow where you want the customer to get very fixed, very set content at different times, out of all of those jobs to be done, out of all of those things you want the customer to receive, what fits really nicely in the automation bucket? And then from there, we could layer on and go, okay, well, what maybe doesn't fit in an automation, but actually an agent could take care of? Because perhaps it's okay to send automatically, but it doesn't necessarily fit into a predefined bucket. We want it to be a bit more fluid and a bit more adaptive to that customer and their data and their usage and their scenario. And then from there, when you've thought about, well, what can I automate? What can I give away to an agent? Then you think about what's left that only a CSM can do. What are those high value, high impact activities that should always be reserved for a CSM or an AM or a renewals manager? And when we thought about this, we were considering, okay, well, there may be things that I want my key stakeholders to receive at different parts of that customer lifecycle, because they're really key for me to drive change and drive adoption across the entire customer. But there's also things that maybe I want the end user to receive. And so we try to use both lenses as we thought about this. Now, just for a bit of fun, to show you that we did actually do this in real life, we sat in a room with a whiteboard. We mapped out the different phases. We mapped out all the jobs to be done. And what did we think we could give away to automation? What do we think we could give to an agent? What do we think we can give to a CSM? And here's a lovely picture of KJ on her birthday. What more could you want from your birthday other than mapping out an automation strategy? So we literally sat and wrote all of this out. And actually then what that translated into was something a little bit like this. Now, this was our V1, and you're going to hear us at the end talk about, like, don't be afraid to just give things a go and build a first version and then test and iterate. So this is our V1 that we're going to show you as an example, but we've built on that since then. So we said, hey, okay, well, as we look at all of that jobs to be done and all the things that we want our customers to receive, well, actually what we're really happy to give away to an automation as V1 is a brand new stakeholder series. So when a customer signs, I want new stakeholders in that customer to get very specific content in their first 4 weeks. I also want the users in that customer to get very specific content in their first 4 weeks. So I'm happy to give that job to an automation. And then when it comes to the renewals, well, actually, when it gets to 120 days out from that renewal date or end of contract date, I'm really happy for that to be a very set piece of content and set notification that goes through to the customer in the same way that we want to thank them for renewing and talk about the journey ahead. And then from there, we started to layer on, okay, well, what are we happy to then give away to agents? So what feels like it could be automated, but we want that journey to be a bit more fluid. And so here's the work that's going to go to the agents. And then here's the work that we're going to save and we're going to really make space for the CS team. That, like, understanding what value means, showing that value back, regularly syncing and presenting back the data, and then teeing that into your renewal discussions, your growth discussions, and all of your negotiation. So this is how we started to piece it together as a team. And then what I'm going to show you is just a bit of an example as to how we thought about the automations and the agents working really closely together, because again, we get asked a lot about that. So if we zoom in just on the onboarding piece, this is the flow that we're operating at the moment, that we're starting to then think about how do we build off of. So from the moment the customer signs and that contract starts, what we do whilst the customer is going through the technical implementation is we send a 4-part series to all of the key stakeholders that were included in that handover from sales. So we're making sure that early doors, we're getting them excited about Hook. We're talking to them about their role in driving adoption of the Hook technology. And then we're getting them thinking about some of the things that will make Hook really relevant to them and their use case and what they're trying to drive. So whilst that stakeholder is not in Hook day to day, what we're doing is very intentionally sowing some seeds on the things that we want them to think about. Then once the technical implementation is complete and people start to get access, then we're running a user-based automation. So, hey, new user, you've now got access to Hook. Here's how you log in. And then week by week over, I think, again, a 4-week period, KJ, for some reason, we're obsessed with 4 weeks here. We're drip feeding them the most exciting content. So as a user, here's the things that we think you want to know about Hook. Go in and try this thing and check that thing. And this is a really cool use case. And then once they've had their very use case specific enablement, which again, we're right now reserving for a CSM because that feels like a really high value, high impact activity. Then all of the users are in and they're using. That's when we activate the agent. And the agent's job is then to look at every customer's specific usage towards what we think are really good goals at the 30, 60, 90-day mark. And to then constantly define, okay, well, what does this customer need based on how they're using the platform and the areas that they haven't yet adopted versus this customer over here might need something different. So that's how we're choosing to layer in the automations with the agents and give different things different jobs for different reasons. Just a couple of examples of what some of these automated emails can look like. And I've pulled these in because I think when we think about automated emails, we think, oh, that's probably really stuffy and really boring, and it probably doesn't look that exciting. We've actually leveraged, or KJ built a really cool Claude skill for this. So whenever we want to write a piece of automated email content, we can go into our Claude skill, and that's got our tone of voice, it's got our style, it's got our logos preloaded, and we can tell it a bit about what we want to say, the kind of content, things that are important, the links we want to include, and it'll help us create some really, really cool visual content that we're now including as part of our automated series. So I'm showing this because automations don't have to be boring. Automated content doesn't have to be boring. It can now be really, really engaging as part of your CS process. And you'll see, because we're Hook, we have this lovely ability to call out that yeah, this is automated content, and we're doing this for a reason, because we want to show you what's possible, but also we really care about your CSM spending time with you on these 3 things. So yes, you are going to get an automated experience as part of your holistic journey. So that was the first thing that we did. We mapped out the customer journey. We thought about, for the customer in these different phases, what's the experience? What's the information that they need to have? What are the jobs to be done? And then who do we want to give that to? Does that go to an automation? Does it go to an agent? Or does it go to a CSM? The next thing that we then did, thinking about those 2 categories that KJ talked you through, so we've kind of covered this journeys and life cycle piece. Now we want to think about the more behavior-based automations. So if a customer's doing this, if they're healthy, if they're unhealthy, if they're behaving this way, then what do we want the experience to be? What does the customer then need to receive? And then again, applying the same kind of theory. But in this way, we thought about it a little bit differently. And this is the way that we also coach our customers on how to think about this too. So the first step is to think about, what's the outcome you're trying to drive here? Do you care most about improving your retention or reducing your churn? Do you care most about increasing your expansion or your NRR number? Or do you care most about your CS team's efficiency? Most customer success teams and most CS leaders are thinking about one of those 3 things. Of course, it might be something totally different for you, but this tends to be the starting point for us. Now, it might be that you guys care about all 3 of those things, in which case you're just going to rinse and repeat the next exercise that I talk you through. But once you've figured out what the outcome is that you're trying to drive, the next step is to think about what's the biggest pain point that is preventing me from getting to that outcome right now? And then how do I start to ask myself some smart questions about those pain points that's going to help me figure out the automations that are going to be most impactful for my CS business? Because yes, automations are there to take work off our plate, but we shouldn't be doing work for the sake of it. We should be doing work as a CS team because it's going to drive the outcomes for our customers and drive the outcomes for our business. So let's take the improved GRR as a bit of a use case here. So let's say I really care about reducing my churn or improving my GRR number. By the way, I know that there's tons of stuff on this slide. It's just to kind of showcase some of the examples on the questions. We'll share all of the slides after, and we also have a really handy guide that you can walk through where these questions are laid out a little bit better. But so if churn is the biggest thing I care about, then what I'm going to start to ask myself is, what's preventing me from improving my GRR or reducing my churn right now? And I start to ask questions like, is it that I don't actually know where my risk is? Is it that I don't have very good visibility of where my risk is? In which case, how am I showing that risk to my team? Once we've found risk, how do I get it visible and in front of my team in the quickest way? Is it that I want to Slack them or send them a Teams message as soon as a new risk is created, or as soon as the health score has had a drop down to low from medium or from high? Or is it that actually the CSMs have great visibility, but the leadership team doesn't? And maybe I want to automate sending some notes through to the leadership team so that we can drive more action and more accountability there. Is it that actually we're really good at spotting our risk, but once we've spotted it, we're not brilliant at actioning it? Maybe we don't know what to action, or there's too many risks to go after, or we have too many customers to do this one-on-one. And so in this case, well, actually, do I want to automate some of the action piece? When there's a brand new risk or when there's a drop in a data point, do I want to automate sending that customer an email or sending them an in-app notification? Is it that actually, once we know where our risk is, we're really good at spotting it, we're really good at actioning it, but we're not very good at preventing the risk coming? We're just facing way too much risk and we need to be a bit more proactive. So in that case, okay, well, what are the things that I want my customers doing? What do I want every customer doing in the platform? And how can I automate some email content or some in-app notifications to constantly drive people back to that particular level of usage? Are there things that I want to be doing across every customer, but my team just don't have the capacity to do right now? In which case, I could set up some really smart automations that give me coverage and give me scale. So from here, we start to think about, okay, what's the outcome I want to drive? What's stopping me from getting there? And then how do I think about some smart automations and actions that I could set up that's going to help me solve that problem to get to that particular outcome? And you can do the same thing across increasing your expansions or your upsells and your NRR goal. You can ask the same kinds of questions about creating better efficiency or doing more with the same team, doing more with less, whatever we want to call it in CS. And again, we'll share all of these questions and all of these slides after. But for us, this is really important because yes, we want to build automations, but as I said, we want to build automations that help you drive the outcomes. So two key ways that KJ and I have really thought about building out our customer automation strategy here at Hook. So as a recap, the first one is thinking about that customer journey. What's the jobs to be done? What can I give to an automation and an agent? And then the second way is thinking about, okay, well, I know I want to adapt my CS support based on how the customer is using the platform, how healthy they are. So, okay, cool. What's the biggest focus for me? What's the outcome I want to drive? And then how do I build some really smart automations that get me there? Now, I hinted at this earlier, but honestly, the biggest piece of advice that we can give you is just give it a go. We speak to tons of CSMs and tons of CS leaders who get themselves in a bit of a loop about, okay, well, I want to build this massive automation strategy and it's got to do all of these different things. But what if a customer ends up here and they also end up here? And honestly, most of the time we've been there, we're overthinking it. We should absolutely just be coming up with little ideas that we think will make a big impact. Test it on a pilot group if you want to, but give it a go. See the impact that it has, see how it influences your adoption, your retention, and your upsells. And then you can tweak and you can build on your strategy from there, just as we have. I told you we like to chat. That was a lot of content to get through in 30 minutes. We've got a couple of minutes left. Are there any questions that you guys want to ask before we wrap up? Whilst you guys are thinking about that, as part of the follow-up, as I said, we'll share the slides. We also have a really good little automations guide that we can share. And we've got a one-pager on some of the key automations that we recommend having set up based on your customer journey. So we'll make sure that we share all of that as part of the follow-up. Whitney is asking, are you training agents in Claude or Hook? We're obviously doing it in Hook. We're helping a lot of customers do it in Hook as well. Most of the time, our customers are leveraging Hook for your customer success specific agents. What they're now also able to do is use our Hook MCP to push the data and insight and all of those signals through and into Claude. And then from there, they're training agents that sit kind of alongside the CS stuff. So we've got some customers who are building out support agents or product feedback agents, or basically are using Claude to do your QBRs, using the skills or do some extra reporting. So we've got lots of customers who are doing a little bit of both. And then another good question, are there any prompts that you can share that might be helpful? Hey, Whitney, do you want to give me maybe a little bit more context on what you're trying to achieve? And then I'll think about if there's anything that we could send as a follow-up. Can certain data criteria trigger different playbook tasks? So yes, you could have one set of criteria trigger more than one automation. You could have it based on if a new risk signal is found, then Slack this CSM and then maybe go and send this email. So that's definitely possible in Hook. I'm sure that's possible in other platforms as well. KJ is the product expert, so I'm sure she's going to jump in if I'm saying this wrong. How do you balance the frequency of actions, triggers, or agents in the journey? That's a really good question. We have this conversation a lot internally about, especially with agents, because they're constantly looking for new information and seeing, okay, well, how has the customer responded to that last message? How are they now using the product, and what else could we go and help them with? You can definitely get to a point where the agent is creating a lot of content to send to your customers, and we want to be a little bit mindful of customer experience. What we do is we set thresholds on the back end to say, hey, you can't do a run, Mr. Agent, more than once every 2 weeks or once every 3 days. That frequency depends on the customer. It depends on their customer's experience and needs. But the way that we manage that is just by setting really clear guardrails on how frequently that can go. And I think how often your customers want to hear from you and are okay hearing from you probably differs CSM to CSM. Okay, last question here from Whitney. Oh, thanks, Whitney, for giving more context. I know that when I use Claude, the prompt is really key to give me good email copy. Since you mentioned you build a Claude skill for this, I'm just curious what best practices you learned for building that skill. KJ, do you want to take that?
Yeah, of course. The first thing I'd say is like Claude is actually really great at helping you build the skill. So just starting somewhere is probably my first lesson. A couple of key things that you should think about. Think about the brand palette that you want to use. So if you've got access to like a brand design kit, then loading that into Claude can be really helpful. Make sure that you're accommodating for like structures that you want to retain versus where you want things to be flexible. So are you okay with like designs changing, or do you want there to be like a really similar format? And then the final thing is think about your variable fields. So if you're sending automations from an automations platform similar to Hook, then you can have dynamic variable fields in your template, and you want to make sure that your Claude skill knows about those dynamic fields too.
Nice, thanks, KJ. Okay, last question. How do you monitor the agent sending messages if you have a business review booked? Would you save the trigger to discuss in the call or send through the automation as well? This is a really good question. So when you're looking at building out an agent, what you want to decide is, do you want that agent to work automatically, or do you want it to send you the actions to review before it goes? And so when we're working with our customers, what we tend to find is more scaled segments. You're really happy for those automations to go automatically. As you move up and maybe you're in more of a managed enterprise segment, perhaps you want those actions to come for you for review. And then that's where you have a decision to make, right? How long is it before the business review? Do I want to wait and have that conversation then? Does this piece of information contribute to the business review, or actually is it okay that that's sent separately so that I can talk about other things? Quite often what we're talking with our team about is like elevating your level of conversation in a business review or in a monthly sync. And so actually having some of these smaller conversations async is really beneficial because you're able to still drive the behaviors and get the customer the information they need whilst like protecting your time live with the customer. So I think there's a couple of things there. It's like making sure if you are using an agent that you've given yourself that ability to review before it sends, and then making that decision on whether or not you send it versus whether you keep it for another time. All right. You guys have been wonderful. Tons of really good questions. Thank you. As I mentioned, we're going to send the recording, we'll send the slides, and we'll send a couple of guides and one pages that we think will help you. If this content has been valuable, please come along again to a future webinar. We're trying to run these monthly, and follow KJ and I on LinkedIn. We're constantly posting and sharing good stuff about this stuff. But other than that, thank you so much for joining and have a good rest of your day. See you later.